Dad sacrifices my dreams for the golden child, then denies my tuition, but I get the last laugh. Growing up, I always knew I was not my father's favorite. That spot was reserved for my younger brother, Daniel. From the time we were in middle school, it was clear that my father saw something in him that he never saw in me. Over time, I learned to accept it, even though it stung. The truth was, I was never the kind of son he wanted. While he lived and breathed sports, I had no interest in them at all. He tried to get me into football, baseball, anything that involved competition and roughhousing, but I was terrible at it. No matter how hard I tried, I could not force myself to enjoy it. Eventually, my dad gave up on trying, and our relationship slowly started to fade. Daniel, on the other hand, was everything my dad could have asked for. He was fearless, athletic, and never hesitated to get his hands dirty. He excelled in sports, and my dad made sure everyone knew it. At every game, my father was there, cheering him on, proud of every tackle, every touchdown, every win. Meanwhile, I was just there. When my father talked about his sons, it was always about Daniel. How talented he was, how strong he had become. I was an afterthought, the quiet one, the odd one, the son he did not quite understand. The only person who never treated us differently was my mother. She made sure we were both loved equally, and I clung to that. Maybe that is why I was so close to her. She was my safe place, the only person in the house who truly saw me. But life has a cruel way of taking the people you love most. Losing my mother. While I was in 8th grade, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. By the time we found out, it was already too late. One moment, she was there, holding us together, making everything feel okay. The next, she was gone. Losing her broke me. I did not know how to process it. My father and brother reacted in the opposite way. They buried their grief, refused to talk about it, acted like shutting off their emotions would make the pain disappear. But I could not do that. I felt like I was drowning, and the only thing that brought me any comfort was cooking. My mother had been an incredible cook. She once told me that if life had gone differently, she would have been a chef instead of taking over my grandfather's business. After she passed, I found myself in the kitchen constantly. I would experiment with new recipes, recreate the dishes she used to make, anything to feel close to her. That did not sit well with my father. A growing divide. At first, he just made snide remarks about how much time I spent cooking. He called it a waste of time, a distraction, something a man should not be doing. But when I did not stop, he grew more aggressive. One day, he lost his patience completely. He stormed into the kitchen and told me that if he caught me in there again, I would be responsible for all the household chores. He said I needed to grow up, be more like my brother, and stop embarrassing myself. That was the day we had our worst fight. I yelled at him, told him he never cared about me, never supported me, never even tried to love me. I expected him to argue, to deny it, to at least pretend I was wrong. But he just looked me in the eye and said, I never did. Hearing it out loud hurt more than I thought it would. That was the moment I gave up. From that point on, I stopped trying. I stayed in my room, listening to music, studying recipes, teaching myself everything I could about cooking. I decided then and there that I was going to make this work. Not just for me, but for my mother. I barely spoke to my father after that, only when necessary. My brother ignored me too, treating me like I was not even there. After my mom was gone, I realized I had no one left in that house. Chasing my dream. By the time I finished high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was going to become a chef. I applied to some of the best culinary schools, along with a few regular colleges, as a backup. I had spent the summer secretly interning at a restaurant, working hard, and earning a recommendation letter that would give me a real shot at getting in. And it paid off. I got accepted into multiple schools, including one of the top culinary institutes in France. The moment I saw the acceptance letter, I felt like my dream was finally within reach. But there was one problem. I needed my father's approval. I knew he would not be happy about it, but I hoped, prayed, that he would at least consider it. Maybe if I could just talk to him, explain how much this meant to me, he would come around. I was prepared for him to insult my career choice. I was prepared for him to call it a waste of time. But I was not prepared for what actually happened. The ultimate betrayal. When I told him I'd been accepted, he did not even hesitate. No. I stared at him, confused. No? What do you mean, no? I'm not paying for it, he said simply. I could not understand. My father was not struggling financially, not even close. He had more than enough money to send me to France. Why? I asked. You can afford it. His answer made my stomach drop. If you go to that school, it will make your brother feel like a failure. I cannot believe what I was hearing. Daniel had been struggling in school. His grades were terrible, and he had no real plan for the future. My father was afraid that if I went to a prestigious school in France, it would make Daniel feel insecure. His solution? Either I go to community college or figure out how to pay for it myself. He was willing to throw my future away just to protect Daniel's ego. I begged him to reconsider. I told him this was my dream, that I had worked for this. He did not care. He made it clear Daniel's well-being mattered more than mine. That was it for me. I packed my bags and walked out his house for good, starting over. I had no plan, no backup, no way to pay for school. The only person I could turn to was my mother's sister. I had avoided moving in with her before because I did not want to change schools, and because deep down I had still wanted to hold on to the house where my mother had once lived. But now I had no choice. I told my aunt everything. She was furious. She was not rich, but she promised me that she would find a way to help. And she did. With the help of her friends, she managed to raise enough money to send me to culinary school. I will never forget that. Making on my own, once I arrived in France, I worked part-time to support myself. I poured everything into my studies, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. When I graduated, I was one of the best in my class. Within months, I landed a job at a high-end French restaurant. I spent years building my career, sending money back to my aunt, slowly paying off my debt to her. And then, after saving up enough, I moved back home. Not to reconcile with my father, not to make amends with my brother. I came back to open my own restaurant. It took years of hard work, but I finally did it. And when it was time to name the restaurant, I knew exactly what to call it. I named it after my mother. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had one. I had built this on my own, without my father, without my brother, without their approval. And yet, I should have known, the second they heard about my success, they came running. Because of course they did. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my father about my acceptance in a culinary school, I braced myself for the worst. I expected him to scoff, to dismiss my dreams, maybe even lecture me about how cooking was not a real career for a man. But what I was not prepared for, what truly blindsided me, was his outright refusal to pay for my tuition. At first, I thought I had misheard him. "You are not paying?" I asked, confused. "Why?" His answer was as ridiculous as it was infuriating. "It is not about the money," he said, as if that made it any better. "I just do not think it is a good idea." That was a lie. My father was not struggling financially, not in the slightest. He could have afforded to send me to France without breaking a sweat. But then he gave me the real reason, and it made my stomach turn. "If you go to that school, it will make Daniel feel bad about himself." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Daniel had been struggling academically. His grades had been slipping, and he had no clear direction for his future. My father was worried that if I went to a prestigious culinary school in France, it would make him feel inferior. He did not want me to outshine my brother. So his solution? Either I go to community college or figure out how to pay for it myself. I was stunned. I had worked so hard for this. I had done everything right. And now, because my father was afraid my success would make Daniel look bad, he was willing to crush my dreams without a second thought. I pleaded with him, tried to reason with him, but he was unshakable. "Daniel's well-being comes first," he told me. "I do not want you competing with your own brother." That was it. That was the moment I realized, fully, completely, that I meant nothing to him. After years of trying to prove myself, of hoping that maybe one day he would see me, respect me, love me, I finally saw the truth. I was never his priority. I never would be. Something inside me snapped. I did not even remember everything I said in that final argument, but I know I yelled, I know I told him exactly what I thought of him, and I know I stormed out of that house and never looked back. A new beginning. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew I could not stay there. The only place I could go was to my mother's sister, my aunt. I had avoided moving in with her before because I could not bring myself to leave the house I had grown up in, the house where my mother had once been. And truthfully, A part of me had still been holding onto the hope that my father would change. That maybe if I tried hard enough, he would finally accept me. But now I knew better. When I arrived at my aunt's house and told her everything, she was furious. She had never been my father's biggest fan, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. I hated asking for help, hated the idea of burdening her, but she did not even hesitate. She reassured me that we would figure it out together. Somehow, she managed to pull together enough money, with the help of her friends, to send me to the culinary school of my dreams. I will never forget what she did for me, building my future. When I got to France, I knew I had no choice but to make this work. There was no safety net, no fallback plan. This was it. I worked part-time to cover my expenses, sometimes pulling double shifts just to make ends meet. It was exhausting, but I refused to complain. I studied harder than I ever had before. I pushed myself every single day, and it paid off. By the time I graduated, I was one of the most skilled chefs in my class. Within months, I landed a job at a high-end French restaurant. It was tough work, but I loved every second of it. For years, I stayed in France, working my way up, refining my skills, saving every penny I could. Half of my salary went back to my aunt. I wanted to repay her for everything she had done for me. Then, finally, after years of grinding, I had saved enough to return home and open my own restaurant. A dream realized. It took time, but I made it happen. In the meantime, I worked as a head chef at another restaurant, getting everything in order for my own place. A few weeks ago, after years of preparation, my restaurant officially opened. Two of my closest friends from culinary school became my business partners, and they let me choose the name of the restaurant. There was only one choice that made sense. I named it after my mother. Everything had finally come full circle. The celebration and an uninvited surprise. To celebrate, we hosted a private event before opening to the public. I invited my aunt, her friends who had helped me, and some old friend from school. But I did not invite my father or Daniel. Even if I had wanted to, I would not have known how to reach them. After I left, they never once tried to contact me. No calls, no messages, nothing. I assumed they had moved on, just as I had. But I should have known better, because the second they heard about my success, they showed up, uninvited. At first, I did not even recognize them. They walked into my restaurant an hour before the event started, smiling like we were some happy family. Security had let them in, without question. They had told them they were here to surprise me. And, to be fair, I was surprised. Not in the way they expected, though. My father walked up to me, grinning. "Son, I always knew you could do it." Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, man. This place is amazing." I just stood there, speechless. They had ignored me for years. Let me struggle. Let me fight alone. Now, when I had built something of my own, they suddenly decided they cared. I said nothing. I was waiting for them to get to the real reason they were here. And then my father pulled something out of a bag, a framed painting. It was a portrait of my mother. "I had this made for you," he said. "Thought you might want to hang it in the restaurant." I stared at it, unsure how to feel. My mother would have loved this place. She would have been proud. But my father had no right to use her memory like this. Then, as I expected, the truth finally came out. Daniel, my father explained, had been struggling. His grades had not been good, and he had bounced from one job to another before finally settling as a bartender at a club. It was not what he wanted, though, and that was why they were here. My father wanted me to make Daniel a partner in my business. That was when everything became clear. They had not come to celebrate me. They had come to take what I had built. I had worked for this. I had fought for this. I had sacrificed everything for this. And now, after all these years, after everything they had done, they wanted me to hand it over. I felt the anger rise inside me, but I pushed it down. This was not the time to lash out. I had a better plan. I smiled politely and said, "I will think about it." I had no intention of thinking about it. I just wanted them to stay long enough, because by the end of the night, they were going to regret ever showing up. The moment I saw them standing there, grinning like we were some happy family, I knew this was not a coincidence. My father and brother had not spoken to me in years, and now, suddenly, they showed up at my restaurant's grand opening? No, this was no heartfelt reunion. They were here for something. They arrived an hour before the party was set to begin. The security at the entrance let them through without hesitation. We shared the same last name, after all, and when they told security they were here to surprise me, there was no reason to turn them away. And to be fair, they were not lying. I was definitely surprised. When they spotted me, they walked over like nothing had ever happened. My father patted me on the back as if he had been cheering me on all these years, and my brother clapped me on the shoulder, his grin a little too wide. "Son, I knew you could do it," my dad said, his voice filled with a warmth I had never heard before. "I'm so proud of you, man," Daniel added, shaking his head as if he was overwhelmed by my success. I just stood there, silent. My mind was racing. I should have expected this, should have known they would show up the second they realized I had built something without them. My friends must have sensed my unease. After exchanging polite greetings with my father and brother, they excused themselves, leaving us alone. I was grateful for that. I didn't want to drag them into whatever this was about to be. Before I could say anything, my dad pulled out a framed painting from a bag. When he turned it toward me, I felt my breath hitch. It was a portrait of my mother. "I had this commissioned for you," my father said, his voice low. "I thought you could hang it up in your restaurant, keep her memory alive here." I stared at the painting, my emotions tangled between anger and something I could not quite name. He had no right to do this. Not after everything. And as soon as I heard about this place opening, I just knew it had to be my son behind it, he continued. "I always knew you had it in you." Daniel jumped in then, eager to be part of whatever act they were putting on. "This is amazing, man. Really, I always knew you would do something big." "Lies. All of it." I nodded, staying quiet, waiting for them to get to the real reason they were here. They had a reason. They always did. Sure enough, after a bit more empty praise and forced sentimentality, my father cleared his throat, his tone shifting slightly. "So, your brother's been working as a bartender. Good work, honest work, you know, but it is not exactly what he wants to be doing long term." I kept my face neutral. "Yeah," I said, playing along. "Yeah," my father said. "And you know, he has experience now, knows the business. I was thinking maybe he could join you, be a partner in all of this." There it was. I almost laughed. Almost. My brother? A partner in my restaurant? The same brother who had never lifted a finger to support me? The one who had coasted through life, always expecting things to be handed to him? The same father who had refused to pay for my education because my success would make Daniel feel insecure, now wanted me to hand him a position of power in my business? I felt the anger rise inside me, but I pushed it down. This was not the time to explode. No, I had something better in mind. I forced a polite smile and nodded. "I will think about it," I said. It was a lie. I was not going to think about it. I was not going to entertain the idea for even a second. But I was not going to turn them away either. Not yet, because I had a plan. They had come here expecting to bask in my success, to rewrite history like they had always supported me. They had no idea what was coming. I wanted them to stay. I wanted them to sit through this party, to watch as I celebrated with the people who had actually stood by me. And then, when the moment was right, I was going to say what needed to be said. As the guests began to arrive, my father and brother settled in comfortably, chatting with people, acting like they had always been part of my journey. I overheard my dad talking about how proud he was, how he had always believed in me. I saw Daniel nodding along, soaking in the admiration of strangers who thought he had played some role in my success. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive, but their delusion would not last much longer. As the night went on, I made my way through the crowd, greeting guests, making sure everyone was enjoying themselves. My father and brother did the same, blending in, laughing, drinking, acting like they belonged. And then, it was time for the toast. My friend spoke first, sharing stories of our time in culinary school, of the struggles and sacrifices that had led to this moment. I listened, smiling, waiting. And then, finally, it was my turn. I took a deep breath, raised my glass, and looked out at the room. My father and brother were standing near the center, smiling up at me, completely unaware of what was coming next. It was time to tell the truth, the speech that changed everything. I raised my glass, looking out at the faces in the room, the people who had stood by me, the people who had helped me when I had nothing. And then my father and brother, two people who had never once supported me, standing right there, pretending like they belonged. I took a breath. "First, I want to thank every single person in this room," I said, my voice steady. "You all have been a part of this journey in one way or another, and I wouldn't be standing here today without you. But more than anyone, I want to dedicate this moment to my mother." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. She was the reason I had the courage to pursue my dreams in the first place. She believed in me before I even knew how to believe in myself. Even when she was no longer here, the lessons she taught me, the kindness she showed me, and the love she gave me, that's what kept me going. The room was silent. I took a sip of my drink, then set the glass down. Now, I want to talk about what it took for me to get here. I saw my father's posture stiffen. My brother shifted uncomfortably. I continued. I was accepted into one of the best culinary schools in the world. But there was a problem. My father refused to pay for it. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he was afraid my success would make my younger brother feel like a failure. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I glanced at my father. His jaw was clenched, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. I went on. He told me to either go to a community college or pay for myself. So I did. I left home. My aunt and her friends, people who had no obligation to me, helped me when my own father would not. They believed in me when he did not. People were whispering now. My father's face was red. My brother stared at the floor. But despite everything, I said, I made it. I worked my way up. I built this place from the ground up. And now, after years of ignoring me, after years of treating me like I was nothing, my father and brother decided to show up tonight. My father looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I turned to them with a smile. But you know what? I'm grateful to them too. Because if they hadn't made my life so difficult, I never would have learned how to survive on my own. So thank you, Dad. Thank you, Daniel. A few people clapped, awkward and hesitant. Others just glared at my father and brother, their expressions a mix of judgment and disgust. Then, to really seal the moment, I walked over and pulled both of them into a hug, just like they had done when they arrived, pretending we were some happy family. Two could play this game. And then, for the grand finale, I announced that, since they had come to celebrate my success, I was willing to offer my brother a job as a bartender. Not a partner, not a manager, a bartender. To the guests, it looked like a touching moment of reconciliation. To my father and brother, it was humiliation. They had no choice but to smile and accept it because storming out would only make them look worse. But I could see the anger in their eyes. After the party, the confrontation, once the crowd had cleared out and the night was over, they were waiting for me outside the restaurant. My father was furious. My brother's face was twisted with anger. His voice cracked when he spoke. How could you do that to us? Daniel hissed. If you never planned on making me a partner, you should have just told us from the start. I laughed. Oh, you mean like how Dad should have just told me he'd never support me from the start instead of leading me on? Or how you ignore me my entire life, but suddenly care now that I'm successful? Daniel's hands clenched into fists. My father was quieter, but his expression was tight with rage. You humiliated us. I shrugged. It's what you deserved. I turned and walked away. I did not bother looking back, even when Daniel's voice broke as he shouted after me, calling me cruel, telling me I would regret this. But I knew I would not. This was justice. Update 1, the aftermath. I have not heard from them since the night of the party. My aunt thinks I went too far. She says I should have just turned them away at the door instead of putting on that whole show. Maybe she's right. But honestly, I do not regret it. They came to leech off my success, thinking I would just roll over and let them in. They wanted to rewrite history, to pretend they had always been in my corner. No, they had their chance. They threw it away. But of course, my brother could not just let it go. Instead of moving on with his life, he started spreading rumors. He told everyone from our old school that I had humiliated him and Dad at the restaurant, that I had invited them just to publicly disgrace them. He even made up a story about me serving them old, expired food to embarrass them. I ignored it first. I did not care what a bunch of people from high school thought. But then, customers started asking me about it. That is when I stepped in. I sent my brother a message, straight to the point. If you do not stop spreading lies, I will make sure you lose the job you have now too. Let's see how long he keeps this up. Update 2, The ultimatum. My brother finally replied. He said he would stop only if I made him a partner. I nearly laughed out loud. Does he even hear himself? He is actively trying to ruin my reputation. And his grand idea for fixing this is for me to hand him a position in my business? No, I told him flat out. If he does not stop immediately, he will be hearing from my lawyer. He is in no position to be making demands. I have held back because I do not want to deal with unnecessary drama. But if he keeps pushing, I will make sure he regrets it. This is his last warning. Update 3. The last straw. It has been about a month since the last update. My brother finally stopped spreading rumors, but my father was not done yet. He showed up at my house with Daniel, claiming they had spoken to a lawyer and were planning to sue me for using my mother's name for the restaurant. I called their bluff instantly. No lawyer would take such a ridiculous case. She was my mother too, I told them, not just his wife. They must have realized I was not falling for their nonsense because my brother snapped. He lunged at me, grabbing at my collar like he was ready to throw a punch. My father held him back, probably realizing that if this escalated, I could actually press charges. That is when my father decided to play his last card. If your mother could see what you were doing to us, she would be ashamed. I have heard some low things in my life, but this was rock bottom. I stepped closer to him, my voice calm but firm. You do not get to use her to manipulate me, I said. Not after everything you did. We are past the point of reconciliation. Now leave. And for the first time, he actually listened. I stood there, watching as they walked away. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was the last time they would ever try to come back into my life. And I was fine with that.